From inside the Peterson Event Center, I'm Mike Asti. This is Alan Saunders, and it is Backyard Brawl time. Where else to do this but at home of the Pitt Panthers? But it's not just about Pitt for this broadcast. It is Pitt versus the West Virginia Mountaineers in a game that's always big for this region, a big rivalry game, and a game that's kick-starting the college basketball season early in the year for both clubs. Alan, Pitt opened up the year with a big victory, kind of an upset win, turning the course of what many thought their season was last year. Big win against Florida State, then all of a sudden pops the balloon and ends up with a loss to Nicholls State. What do you make of the Panthers going into this game? Because they're going in a different situation than the Mountaineers that we'll get into in a second.
Yeah, and obviously Pitt's going to have another game between now and then. They're going to play Robert Morris. But I think, to me, the big thing about we've seen about Pitt is that anything can happen. They're a young team. They're going to be unpredictable. They're obviously talented enough to beat a team. If they beat Florida State, then Florida State goes on and beats Florida, a top 10 team on the road.
Right.
So, I mean, they're obviously very talented, can beat anybody, can play with anybody. But I think it's also a team with significant and serious flaws when it comes to their ability to shoot from the outside of Ryan Murphy, when it comes to their ability to get the ball into the paint, their rebounding. I mean, they're definitely a team with a lot of holes, and I don't think a particularly great matchup for West Virginia. I saw the Mountaineers when they had their exhibition game against Duquesne and I was, this has been predicted to be a down year for West Virginia. I actually came away from that game fairly impressed. I think this team is going to be better than a lot of people think. What do you make of West Virginia? Obviously, we just won a game so far against Akron, a nice win. Obviously, Bob Huggins not totally satisfied afterwards, as we saw with our coverage from Cody Nesper at WV Sports Now, our brother site. But what do you take away so far from what you've seen from the Mountaineers?
Yeah, and this is where Pittsburgh Sports Now, WV Sports Now kind of meet together here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. But the Mountaineers are a team that last year they're coming off of a miserable season last year where it didn't go as many would have thought coming into that year with Konate and that whole drama. I actually think kind of what you're saying, based on that Akron game too and going the exhibition game, there's not much else to gauge prior to the Pitt game because they don't have any other games. They're going to have a long rest. But this is a Mountaineer team that I do think is going to surprise some people. I do think this is going to be a team that's going to have a dark horse chance at an NCAA tournament berth even, although it's going to be a team that we're not going to unfortunately get to learn much of until almost the first of the year. They have a relatively easy schedule. Pitt is arguably the toughest team they will play the first 2 months of the season. Then they will have Ohio State. Obviously, that's going to be a rough go. Then getting into conference play, Kansas right after. The Mountaineers could honestly go undefeated to the Ohio State game and then come out of that in the next month and a half with only 2 wins. So you don't know what the season will hold, but this is a team that can rebound well, has issues maybe shooting. Huggins wants to get a lot out of the team. He loves teams that can rebound. But unlike recent teams, it's not just one guy getting the load of rebounding. It's kind of a collective group. We'll see. Tons of question marks around the Mountaineers so far, as well as Pitt, but it's hard to really gauge West Virginia, unlike Pitt, that's going to have some tests.
Yeah, I think to me the thing that I really took away from that exhibition game against Duquesne is the front court of West Virginia is impressive to me. Culver obviously coming back, one of the best returning players I think, and then the Oscar Shibwe, the freshman from Kennedy Catholic, really was impressive to me. He does not have a lot of polish on the offensive side, but he's going to bang and rebound and block shots and be a real warrior in the paint.
So he's a typical Bob Huggins player, for sure.
He's a perfect Bob Huggins player, and I think he's going to be a huge fan favorite in West Virginia because that's the kind of basketball they love to play. I was talking to Duquesne head coach Keith Dambrot afterwards. He said, you playing against Bob Huggins, it's like more mud wrestling than basketball, and I think Oscar Shibwe is going to be a player that is really going to give Pitt a ton of trouble because they don't have anybody with his size. I mean, he's 6'9", but also super physical, and just Pitt is not a physical team right now. They don't have anyone inside the place with an edge. I think that's going to be a key matchup in this one. And unlike, the blueprint that Nicholls State followed to beat Pitt, I don't think West Virginia has it in it. They're not going to shoot 45% from three-point range. That's just not going to happen. But I think there is a different blueprint there for the Mountaineers, probably more similar to the one we saw them play last year when Sags Konate was a huge factor in the game. I think he had a double-double with like 5 blocks or something like that. Obviously dealing with a younger player. younger players in Culver, but I think the same kind of script is there for WVU if they can take advantage of it.
Yeah, the days of Kevin Pissnoggle shooting the lights out, that's gone. That's not the Bob Huggins style. That's not going to be there. There's not one player that can take over games. There's not even a Deshaun Butler there. So the Nicholls State method probably won't work, but it'll be similar to last year, I'd imagine, strategy-wise. And Sags Kanate, how many of you have heard of him in a while? Because I feel like that's his last basketball moment.
It really is. I mean, it's been a while, but and I think from Pitt's perspective, they need to find a way to get to what did work against Florida State can work against West Virginia. I mean, I think stylistically a little bit different, but for Pitt, the big obstacle is the same, is those big forwards. I mean, when you think about Florida State, that's a team that always has 7-footers, usually has multiple 7-footers, and Pitt got those players into foul trouble in 5 minutes and had the game completely changed by that. I think that's the way Pitt has to make that happen. And I think if you remember that game last year down in Morgantown.
That's what I thought Pitt was going to do.
Pitt tried to do that, and they didn't get the calls. And I think Pitt was pretty upset. I was in the Pitt locker room after that game, and I think one of the themes was like, man, we did what we always do, and the fouls weren't there. They just let them tackle us.
We also got to hit shots when you're doing that, too, which Pitt struggled with early.
Well, I think this game being in Pittsburgh instead of in Morgantown might be a significant advantage when it comes to being able to play the referees a little bit. That's not a place where you want to be driving home afterwards in stripes if you weren't particularly favorable to the home team. I think that may help. Also, I do think this is a Pitt team that plays off the energy of the crowd. Part of that loss to Nicholls State was, Nicholls shot 35%, 45% from three, but also it was a noon game on Saturday in front of a dead empty house, and the players played like it was a dead empty game. This is going to be on ESPN, packed house to the rim. Sure, it's going to be like a 60-40 crowd. It was probably closer to 70-30 the other way last year, but I mean, I think it's probably going to be closer to half here tonight. But I think that's going to be the thing that maybe the home court advantage, I think, is going to be key for Pitt, especially for a young team. West Virginia is a tough place to play on the road for anybody. An experienced team goes in there, they get handed to it pretty easily.
Yeah, and this game does have the makings, if it goes the way you're talking, of not only West Virginia getting into foul trouble early, but Bob Huggins getting tossed, Bob Huggins freaking out, Bob Huggins yelling about, hey, why are we not getting the calls here? This is that. I feel like that's the recipe for this game if West Virginia loses.
Whatever the prop bet on Huggins getting tossed is probably not high enough. Like, if you can get that at like plus 2,000 or something, you need to be taking that.
Well, because on the corner three on the preview show that we did for this game that I predicted Pitt to get the win because I knew how bad the Mountaineers really were, and I thought that Bob Huggins, just knowing the season was going to go in the tubes, would just freak out and be like, I'm just going to entertain myself almost. He knew where the season was going. It didn't happen. Pitt end up with the loss, and West Virginia got their real staple win of the year. Now, one thing also that we have to get to in terms of it's Pitt, it's West Virginia, it's the Backyard Brawl. It's not on the gridiron, but it's here on the hardwood. It's the Peterson Event Center this year. It was in Morgantown last year. In terms of what this game means to these two fan bases, to these two student bodies, and just really everybody in the region, because there's not the consistency anymore in terms of the football rivalry. I mean, it doesn't matter whether they're going to play in a few years or not. They hadn't played in a while. You have a roller coaster ride of that rivalry. And even in other sports outside the two majors, it's not really there anymore. And younger fans, current students, probably don't have the animosity or the hatred for West Virginia that an older generation would have. It's almost irrelevant what WVU does for Pitt, and they don't play. So the fact that this game is happening, the fact that they are playing, what do you feel that means to the Pitt student body, but even the West Virginia student body in general, and how important it is to have at least this rivalry consistently happening, since that's not the case anywhere else?
Well, I think if my Twitter mentions can be the guide, I feel like the hatred for Pitt from the West Virginia perspective has persevered throughout the gap in playing much better than it has the other way around.
Well, Pitt, I feel like Penn State, they've turned to the Penn State hatred, or at least they have it equally. Even older generations, they've hated Pitt and West Virginia and Penn State kind of equally, where West Virginia had Virginia Tech for a while, but Pitt was the team, yeah.
And then I think the other thing is, I think this game is important for Pitt, not so much because of the brawl and because of the rivalry, but because this is an important game in the middle of November, and I think Pitt needs those. This is a team that hasn't drawn anybody the last 2-3 seasons. Like, they need big games in this building this time of year to the Oakland Zoo, the Pitt just completely changed the way. So if you haven't seen a Pitt game yet this year, they completely changed the whole court around at the Peterson Event Center, so the student section will be behind the benches now, so they'll be prominently featured on TV. Legendary student section, been called by visiting coaches one of the toughest places to play in the game. It's been a petting zoo, not it has not been the same, and I think lack of big games that they feel like their team has a chance to win in. I mean, Duke is a big game because it's Duke, but let's be real, I don't think Pitt felt real good about hosting Duke the last couple times. This is a game that, yeah, it matters because of the rivalry, but also this is a big game that Pitt can win.
Is it important? Twitter mentions might explode as well in terms of you're literally saying that Pitt needs West Virginia in a way on their schedule, maybe more than the Mountaineers need Pitt?
I don't know that it necessarily needs to be West Virginia specifically, but they need these games. The Pitt is not Pitt's program is not at a place where they can schedule Northeast Idaho State and expect people to show up.
I feel like in a way though it is West Virginia because Penn State's not competitive in basketball in terms of a program that will bring fans here regardless of how good or bad they are, that's relatively close, that is not a conference game so you can get it early in the season. West Virginia is perfect, plus you have the rivalry.
I mean, Pitt fans would show up to see Pitt beat Penn State in tiddlywinks. So, I mean, like, even though Penn State...
I don't know if Penn State for basketball. I mean, I have Pitt in basketball because they know what... Okay.
And I think they would fill this building for like a number of sort of like Ohio State, for example, that West Virginia is playing this year.
Yeah, that would be a game, yeah.
There are a couple other ones, but I think these games are important to Pitt. I think they're important to Pitt, especially right now as Jeff Capel is building this program. Maybe in 5 years that won't be the case anymore. We'll see. I mean, the ACC is kind of taking some of that thunder away from them by scheduling these games in November. Pitt's already played a conference game. They're going to play another one before Thanksgiving, so there aren't exactly a lot of places in the schedule to put one of these games, but I do think it's important, that Pitt basketball is a story that we're talking about on November 15th again, and as long as it's West Virginia, no matter how bad Pitt is or no matter how bad West Virginia is, this is going to be a game we're going to talk about. This is going to be a game people want to see, and I think that's important for teams that are frankly struggling compared to the expectations of the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a game that's very similar for both programs right now. They're both young teams trying to get over what's happened the last couple years, trying to build things up. Obviously, Huggins has been there for a while, and Capel starting his own thing at Pitt. But still, this is important for both teams. Although it feels like that because Pitt didn't win last year, regardless of what you want to say about the calls and the fact that it was in Morgantown and where their seasons went, Pitt did not win last year when that was just ripe for the taking. So if Pitt would lose this game at home, even if they feel like they're on par with West Virginia, where they're both rebuilding, is that a sense of maybe that going to be demoralizing and it could risk ruining a year after the Nicholls State loss? You have the big win against Florida State. If they would then follow it up, figuring they're going to beat Robert Morris, but it is still a game that's going to have city implications, so that's going to have somewhat of a rivalry, and those kids are going to get up for it. They have to worry about that being kind of a trap game in the middle there. But say, regardless of that outcome, the West Virginia game is a staple game, but if you don't get out of it with a win, are you left as a Pitt kid of this generation thinking, when can we beat them? We didn't do it last year. We didn't do it this year. The Jeff Capel era hasn't done it yet, and now we're going to get closer into the season, closer into big games and conference play with bad taste in your mouth, that we have a rivalry talking smack all year, and then now we have to go into conference play with a lot of teams that are just flat better than us.
I don't think when you're 2 years removed from a season where you didn't win a single game against a major conference opponent that you feel like you should beat anybody yet as a fan base. I think they hope they do. I think they want to.
But they probably feel like that last year might have got stolen from them a little bit, or, I mean...
I don't think so. I don't think there's any expectations on this Pitt program right now for anything other than a competitive season and to, have a good showing when they go out there night in and night out to represent the university well. And I think the one place where it really could hurt is, the ACC schedule is not easy. If they want to think about being a postseason team, you got to get to 500, and that is where I think it could be really meaningful. Is like at the end of the year, if Pitt ends up 1 or 2 games shy of that NIT bid because they didn't get to 500, then I think this could be a game where people might point to. Now, obviously, they're going to look at Nicholls State, but there's not going to be any getting over that. But I think this is another game where you look at. I don't know I haven't seen a line yet, but this is certainly a game Pitt can win, and so I think that could be another thing people look at if that's where the end of the season takes the Panthers.
And I also think that if Pitt does win this game, then the West Virginia schedule favors Pitt, and Pitt needs to root like crazy for West Virginia the rest of the year, because West Virginia has in the rest of their schedule, especially once they get into conference play, but even with Ohio State, some major upset implications in terms of, and it seems like we're in agreement that the Mountaineers are a sneaky team. I almost feel like even if the season starts out strong and then goes down the slide at the end of the year and they only win 3 or 4 games the last month and a half, which is not out of their own possibility, but if one of those games is they sneak all of a sudden and beat Ohio State, or they gave Kansas trouble the last few years, they could lose to Ohio State and then beat Kansas, wouldn't surprise me. If they do that and Pitt has a win over the team that did that, that's big for Pitt too.
And that's another reason to keep playing this game, is because you sort of insulate yourself from your own conference's RPI. I mean, I know we have the new metric that's not RPI anymore now that doesn't make any more or less sense than RPI did, but I mean, it gives you the ability to get a win outside of your conference that stands up, that matters. And I think sometimes, I mean, listen, the ACC, you're not going to typically need that. The Big 12, you're not going to typically need that. But sometimes you need to set yourself apart. Sometimes you need that extra win.
But these two programs need it.
Yeah, I think so. I think right now these two programs need it. Like I said, maybe 5 years, 10 years down the road, Huggins completes a successful rebuild. Capel takes this program where he thinks he's going. Maybe this game doesn't make sense for these teams anymore. I think right now it's vitally important that they, it's not that important to win it. It's important to play it. It's important to have these games available from the fan base perspective, from a resume perspective. But obviously, it feels a lot better at the end of the day if you're the fan base that's playing the alma mater at the end of it.
Yeah, of course, and you're going to have fan bases from both sides, regardless of where you're playing it. They're going to be hearing that alma mater because, again, it's 70 miles difference. You're very close quarters. There's a lot of WVU fans that live and are from Pittsburgh that travel down there for school or are just fans of the institution. So
people that live here that are West Virginia alumni.
Yeah, I don't know where they are or who they are, but they're around. As there's a security guard, I think, heard you and was like, where is he? Let me go after him right now. But yes, those exist that even cover Pittsburgh media. They're around. There's actually more of them than you may think, actually. When we were having lunch at the Heinz Field press box before stealing it, I was looking around before knowing we were going to do this and be like, I'm actually in the majority right now. It's kind of interesting. But I guess we'll wrap it up with this. As Backyard Brawl, Pitt, West Virginia, Alan Saunders, Mike Asti, WV Sports Now, Pittsburgh Sports Now, here, Pittsburgh Sports Live. If Pitt wins, what needs to happen? What is the recipe? If you had to map out the game, what is a Pitt victory? And then we'll get to what a West Virginia victory looks like.
Pitt's guards get to the paint, and they get fouled, and they cause foul trouble for especially Culver and Chubway, and eliminate that threat, that part of the game that Pitt doesn't have a man-for-man answer for. To me, that is the only path Pitt has to winning this game, except for maybe, I mean, they do have the ability with Ryan Murphy and with Trey McGowan's to have some guards that can just go off for 30 points. That hasn't happened yet this year. It didn't happen a lot last year. It's possible, but to me, if Pitt wins, it's because they get to the lane and they get fouled and they dictate the terms of the game at the free throw line, limiting West Virginia's minutes by foul trouble and eliminating the threat of the big West Virginia forwards that they don't really have a man-for-man answer for. If it's West Virginia, how does it go?
If West Virginia wins early, they probably have an early lead where they can hold on to that lead, and Carver and a few others, they're not going to shoot the lights out. That's never going to happen, but they're going to have to shoot well enough. Similar to what the recipe was against Akron, where you start out strong, you're hitting a few shots, and then you can almost play a defense the rest of the way, clamp down, and get into real Bob Huggins basketball in the second half. That's going to be the recipe for West Virginia. If Pitt ends up getting WVU into foul trouble, especially Carver and a few others, if they get them into foul trouble, that could be a recipe for disaster for the Mountaineers. But like last year, whether it be Murphy or whoever, hitting enough shots. Because even if you're getting WVU into foul trouble, if you're not hitting the shots, you're playing par the whole way. It almost doesn't matter. So that's going to be a big deal. West Virginia is going to need to hang on enough and get an early lead. I feel like if West Virginia is less likely to come back in this game.
And also, we didn't talk about the press yet. Now they didn't press as much as they have in the past when I saw them against Duquesne. I honestly don't think it's going to be a big factor in this game. I think the plan against Pitt should be to slow them down, not speed them up. They do better when the game's a mess than in the half court because they don't have that structure to really rely on that a lot of teams do. So I really think that's actually not going to be a huge factor in this one. But
yeah, unlike a few years ago where the Mountaineers, if they had a 2-point lead going into the second half, they were just pressing all the way through, which I think people don't even realize how outstanding it was, how long they were able to press. That was an athletic feat that we haven't seen in a while, but that's not probably happening this year. But I wouldn't be surprised if Huggins tries. I mean, he's a coach that wants to experiment, get the most out of his players. He also wants to test them because they have that long layoff, which I guess, do you think that could be a factor in this game? West Virginia basically had one win against the mid-major. They played well. Everything went well. But then they're on vacation.
I think it's an advantage to West Virginia, honestly. I think Pitt's playing, after coming off the bench, after coming off the beach, going to play 4 games in a little under 2 weeks. And Pitt doesn't have a very deep rotation. So I think they're actually going to be a little bit gassed. I think the layoff is an advantage for West Virginia.
I agree with you, and I would think that it would be rusty for West Virginia. It would not be an advantage for them if they had any other coach. Huggins is not letting this.
Getting rusty in Bob Huggins' practices.
That's what I'm saying.
They're harder than the games.
They're basically playing.
They're getting days off when they play. That's an off day.
That's what I'm saying. They're going to be running on the treadmill. They're playing right now. There are no days off. There is no vacation really for these Mountaineers because of the way Bob Huggins coaches. And I'm sure that secretly he probably doesn't like that long break and says, I'm just going to run you like crazy so you're not really off. And if they would lay an egg because of the rust, get ready for some epic press conference from Huggins because they better show up for the game in terms of what their schedule's coming up with and how they had that long layoff. Huggins is not going to let them cake through or lose games they shouldn't lose because of what's coming up. They would rue the day that occurs. I think they'd be best served to not lose more than 2 going into the deeper part of when they meet that Ohio State game. I guess it's time now to give a prediction.
Oh, you got a prediction? All right, I'll go with Pitt 69-62.
I thought you were about to say 4. I thought it was a 4 coming out. I thought you were about to give West Virginia 40-some points.
69-59, but I'll go 69-62.
Okay, and I did this last year, which led to a WVU win. I'm going to again predict Pitt gets the victory. I feel like this Pitt team, this is ready. They might get the calls that West Virginia got last year early in the game. I feel like this is a Pitt win. I'm going to go probably 64-56, something like that. I think it'll be around a similar situation, but Pitt pulling away. I think Pitt will have a lead. West Virginia will play catch-up, and they just can't come back. I don't think they have the shooters to come back in games, and probably foul trouble will be a thing in this game against the Mountaineers if Pitt wins, which I feel like Pitt's going to get this victory, although I thought they were going to get the win last year, and it didn't happen. Who do you think has I guess, I'll ask this because we won't really have this game going. Who do you think has the better season overall?
I think West Virginia has a better chance to make the NCAA tournament.
Okay.
And I think that's what both of these programs consider a good season.
Yeah, I think Huggins feels that is almost a necessity from where last year was, and they will have. I feel like they have, even with a rough schedule, both teams have that. They have more winnable rough games.
They're going to enter conference play with a very good record. I'm not sure I can say that about Pitt.
Yeah. So there it is. We both have Pitt getting the victory here in the Backyard Brawl, which is going to take place where we are right now, Pearson Event Center. Pitt looking to get revenge for last year's win over the Mountaineers. 2 programs, I guess you could say, rebuilding, looking to make a name for themselves early in the season, doing a different way, a different pass, different early season schedules. But none of that will matter come Friday night when it's the Backyard Brawl, and throw the records out the window, throw everything else out the window when you have this rivalry, which I think we all agree hope continues on for years to come, regardless of where these programs are, because I think they both need each other, whether they want to admit it or. I'm Mike Asti, and for Pittsburgh Sports Now and WV Sports Now, this has been Pittsburgh Sports Live's pregame show for the Backyard Brawl 2019 edition.